Hello, everybody,
Hi there.
and welcome to
Evil Asterisk Podcast
with Jeannie.
And Louise.
We saw
Exhuma.
Exhuma. This is our first Asian film on Evil Asterisk Podcast. We love Asian horror films. We've seen many Korean, Japanese, Chinese, Thai, Vietnamese.
Yeah.
So it's strange that we haven't covered this yet. So
How bizarre.
now we have. We've exhumed. We had an exhumation and we have uncovered a Korean film called Exhuma. The film is directed and written by Jang Jae-hyun. I will read the IMDb description. The process of excavating an ominous grave unleashes dreadful consequences buried underneath. Ooh. What's interesting about this film is that it almost feels like a precursor to a series because it's about a group of people that come together to investigate, exhume graves,
Move the
bodies around. There's a shaman, and there's also a geomancer. We learned something.
Yeah.
We've never known about geomancy.
Well, I remembered that when I was a kid, my dad would hire someone called a water diviner. They had the stick with two ends.
Right.
He would hold on the two ends, and there was one other end that pointed forward. And he would walk around the property and look for a place to dig a water well. These people are known in Brazil, and I guess they exist here too, as these specialists that are supposed to be able to feel and tell where there's water in the ground. So a water diviner is not that different from what Jeannie just mentioned, a geomancer. And I guess she's going to explain what a geomancer does in the context of the movie.
I first wanted to say what the genres were. I had already read the description. The genres are folk horror, supernatural horror, and mystery. But not whodunit. Folk horror is something that we have covered many times. Okay, so going back to what I was saying is that there's a group of people and they come together to investigate. They get hired by people who are concerned about something going on with a burial. It's affecting the descendants of the family. They're worried that there's an evil presence. It reminds me of Evil, the series, right? Mm-hmm. Where people come together from different backgrounds and they try to solve, guess you could say, supernatural crimes for the Vatican. This has some religious underpinnings, but it's about almost like a Ghostbusters-esque group. So going back to the geomancer will go and investigate the land. He even takes some of the land and puts it in his mouth, some of the dirt from a grave, and puts it in his mouth and tastes it. He looks inside the coffin, the casket, sees how things are laid out, area they're facing, what direction they're facing, and comes to the conclusion that this is not working for the family, or it is. He goes through that process. While the shaman and her partner will do various rituals. She does stuff with swords, she'll dance, he chants. The geomancer has a partner that chants a lot as well and reads from various scrolls and stuff like that.
The geomancer, the idea of the role in the context of this particular movie is to find the optimal burial plots. So the places that are, most likely to lead to a good afterlife for whoever's buried there. So the geomancer in this context needs to find locations, and then he makes money by selling those locations.
Right. He scouts them out. But in the context of the film, in the two instances we saw, the people had already been buried, in some cases for decades. So he was tasked with verifying whether or not they should stay buried there or should be moved. So that's part of it. Also, the articles that they're buried with become important. We saw an example where someone was buried with a bunch of different articles, but also without their teeth. And it turned out that this little kid who had felt so close to his grandmother stole her dentures and has been keeping them in his room. They had already discovered that she wants her teeth back. So the poor kid was crying. He's like, well, I wanted to be close to my grandmother, so I took her teeth. That was really funny. No. And there's actually a lot of humor in this film.
We both thought at the same time of the idea that this is almost like a Korean version of Ghostbusters in a way, because of, like Jeannie said, the team aspect and the different skill sets and everything.
In addition to Ghostbusters, which of course is a film franchise, another thing this reminded me of was the Nick Frost, Simon Pegg TV series called Truth Seekers, which is a lot of fun. It's a group of people that solve these paranormal mysteries. But there's also the one from New Zealand.
Is it called Wellington Paranormal?
Yes. Wellington Paranormal. That's it. Ghostbusters, Wellington Paranormal, Truth Seekers, and Evil. We thought of all these shows and movies when we were watching this. And again, there's a lot of humor in it.
The introduction of the geomancer duo, the issue with the grandmother and the missing teeth, is fascinating because it's not necessarily the first thing in the movie, but it introduces those characters and it shows what their job is and what they're hired to do. And it shows them in a Korean context only. So they're in Korea and there's a disruption and they dig up the body of the grandmother and they open the coffin and they look inside and they see where are her teeth. So that subplot, it's not really a plot, it's an intro. It's over right there. Everything else in this movie is part of the bigger story. It can be confusing at first. You might think that this is connected to what comes later, but it's not. It's just there to introduce those two characters and their jobs.
What's also interesting about the movie is we start watching this movie thinking, okay, it's a Korean movie, great. And then what do we see? One of the first things we see, they're in Los Angeles. And we're like, wait a minute, does this film take place in Korea or in Los Angeles? They even have shots of Santa Monica where we are, which is really funny. It turns out that the overarching plot that Luis was referencing takes place in both Korea and in the United States, particularly in Los Angeles, where a family had gotten separated in a way because part of the family moved to the LA area and the other half of the family stayed in Korea. So you have this situation where we also, which also could be confusing, we're talking about some confusion in storytelling. You were saying, well, there's that plot that we thought was going to be a larger plot, but that was just an introductory plot for the geomancer team. And then we see the shaman and her partner in LA initially talking to the family that lives in LA, but the rest of the family's in Korea. So we kind of go back and forth. That's a little confusing.
A little labyrinthine storytelling early on. And we had to like really talk about it and try to figure out what the hell was going on, who's who, and is this connected or not connected. And I was fooled for a while thinking they were related until I finally realized it was just an intro.
Right. And it was intended to show some humor as well with the teeth. It reminded me of these other shows, and I thought it would be really cool to continue with these characters because they're like a motley crew of people that go around and investigate things and maybe move bodies around and stuff. It was a neat idea. So that was one thing I thought was really cool. Another thing is that there is humor. It comes up in strange places, and we'll talk about that as we go. The teeth would be the one example. There is that folk horror genre aspect. What was really interesting is that at the beginning there was a hint of this Japanese element, which of course if you don't know Korean history or the relationship between Korea and Japan and the friction that is between those two countries, you might not get the import of that. But there's a lot of that in there. There's a lot of historical significance. Other than being a little confused, as Luis was at the beginning, not knowing which characters were going to become primary, I loved the fact that they did a lot of sleight of hand, where you thought a character was evil, but they really weren't. They would start a particular explanation, which you've been waiting to hear about, and then all of a sudden they would flip to another scene, and you're like, oh my gosh, what did they say? They would hint at some really scary element by showing a real quick view of something like a creature. The first time we were like, oh my God, you bristle at it and then you go to another scene. Really good job of giving us a little taste of horror and then moving to another scene. But I will say, and I think Luis agrees, that if you love jump scares, you're not going to get them with this film. You're going to get a few instances where you're jarred, but you don't jump. You're like, whoa, what was that? What did I just see? But in a lot of cases, there are reflections where you see an apparition, you see something in the background. You don't see a lot up close, except for this one element that we'll talk about. So it's not that kind of movie. It is more of a thoughtful, historical importance type of movie, but it moved along, except for, I would say, maybe the last 20 minutes, I felt kind of dragged.
Yeah, I really liked it. I don't think I loved it. I think I really, really liked it. And it's incredibly well directed, well put together. It's beautiful. It's very atmospheric and moody. You really feel like you're in those situations in the real world. It doesn't feel fake. It doesn't feel superficial. Everything is perfect in the regard. The acting is top notch. The music is really, really good. It has a scary atmosphere without being necessarily scary as a horror film. And like Jeannie said, it doesn't have almost any jump scares. I think I counted maybe one or two max. That's being very generous. It's an interesting one because the storytelling is a little circuitous and it can take a little while for you to really get engrossed in it and really kind of follow the threads because it's so specific with Korean folklore. And like Jeannie said as well, you really have to know some of the basics of Japan versus Korea and Chinese history as well. Remember that I think it was in the early 1900s toward the middle 1900s, Japan was an empire and they were an expansionist empire, so like most are. And they were trying to expand and conquer and dominate, and they invaded China, Manchuria, and they invaded Korea. In China, it was famously known as the Rape of Nanking, and in Korea, they put puppet governments as well, and they were trying to establish a foothold in Korea. A key part of this movie is the idea that something was done to Korea that injured the country to such a degree that it was split in two, which leads to North Korea and South Korea today. So if you don't understand that, you're going to be in serious trouble with this one because it's very particular about it.
Yeah, at the very beginning, you get a hint because an Asian flight attendant comes over to the shaman and asks her if she needs something or some general question. But she asks it in Japanese. Our shaman character is Korean. So she clearly is offended by that. She looks at her, she goes, I'm not Japanese. At that point, if you don't understand why that's important for the culture, it's going to be more difficult, as Louise said, for you to understand what happens later in the film.
But there's another element where the shaman actually speaks Japanese quite a bit toward the end. And she has a grandmother that protects her. I think it's implied that her grandmother is Japanese, that she does have some Japanese blood in her. They have no reason to speak Japanese if they're Korean.
Yeah, and that might be another reason why she's offended, because she is maybe turning her back on her own familial background, but then kind of embraces it a bit toward the end in the context of what they find in the grave. She comes to terms, let's say. She comes to terms with her background.
Yeah. And there's a comedic element in this that Jeannie mentioned that's there all the time. It's just right under the surface. You might miss it if you're not really paying attention. But one thing I found hilarious is that every time they deal with what they call a Japanese ghost or spirit, they say that they are the worst and they kill everything. And they're like the worst possible type of spirit you found. And it made me think immediately to all those Japanese horror movies like The Ring, Pulse, and whatever else that are always so brutal and so terrifying. And maybe the Koreans pride themselves in having nicer ghosts than Japan.
Maybe that's what it is. It's sort of like, this wouldn't be a horror movie if there wasn't a Japanese ghost in it.
Yeah.
You know? That's funny.
I thought that was hilarious.
One of the things I wanted to mention while you were talking about not being as scared as you'd want to be. Here's my thought about this. And this happens a lot in Korean horror films. I've noticed this. Something is presented to you as a viewer that makes you go, oh my God. And you're like, oh, what's going to happen? And then it doesn't necessarily pay off from the film itself. They don't spell it out, but they make you think about the possibilities. And they make you think about the horror that could be happening. So let's just say, we're more scared of the possibilities. And those possibilities still exist in the world. It's just that they are not delivered to us. And that allows you to open your mind. So we're so used to, Western society is so used to having it handed to us on a platter. Where, okay, here's what I want you to do. I'm going to direct you to what you need to think about. And I'm going to then deliver that punchline to you. We don't get that as much in Korean cinema. And I've noticed that before with other Korean films, horror and otherwise.
That's such a good point. And it's something that I observed on this one throughout the whole film. Exhuma basically will give you this terrifying possibility and dangle it in front of you and say, this is going to happen, this could happen. And then it does kind of happen. But the really graphic violence or the scary outcome, sometimes it's off screen or it's done in a subdued way, to a point where toward the middle of the movie, maybe 3/4 in, I was thinking, is this really a horror movie? Maybe it's more like an adventure film with some horror elements. Because I realized that it wasn't scaring me. Then I thought about it and I thought, wait a minute, but there is some gore. There is some really creepy stuff here. There is like people putting their hands through someone else's body. That is horror. So I'm like wavering.
Yeah, grabbing innards. That's gore. I don't get as scared with gore. This is just me personally. I get scared when there's dread and anticipation, suspense. Psychological horror works very well on me. I like those possibilities. Of course, jump scares scare me as well. But general gore, like someone reaching into a body and pulling out a liver or something, it's like, I don't know. It doesn't really scare me.
Well, we recently watched Terrifier 3, for example, which is a very, very gory, graphic film. And it didn't like scare me.
No.
Definitely grossed me out a little bit.
Yeah, it just grossed you out.
But I was having a lot of fun with it.
Exactly.
And I kept thinking during this one, would it been helped from me being a little more graphic? And I think it would have, to be honest. But it's almost as if it's not targeted toward hardcore horror people.
No.
I think it's really targeted toward more people that enjoy something like Sixth Sense.
It's an eerie element. There is gore, though, more than Sixth Sense, for sure.
For sure,
This is not that type. And there were some weird ideas. There's a lot of chanting, a lot of what might be folk music from Korea. Some of the stuff, I don't even know if it's in Korean. We were talking about how it wasn't getting translated at times. Sometimes it was.
Yeah, I read on Wikipedia that the actress who plays a shaman was actually really worried about doing all the chanting and the rituals in this movie because supposedly they're all real. She was terrifying that she was actually going to end up getting possessed or something.
Oh.
So they actually had a shaman that was a consultant, and he assured her that she'll be fine.
So there were certain chants that were translated, certain that weren't. There was one where she was chanting very quickly. It was very interesting. I liked that one. Let's talk about some of the scares, okay? Because there were scares. The first moment, which we thought, ooh, this is definitely a horror film. I know it's eerie. I know it's more atmospheric, but there were elements that were definitely horrific. And the one that I always go back to is the snake sequence. The main plot, which we still haven't gotten to, relates to a grave that is sitting in a remote area for a grandfather, not a grandmother, so different from the teeth one. It's in a remote area, a mountainous area, where you have to drive in these very windy roads to get to. And there's a gravestone that's basically unmarked, but behind it, it has latitude and longitude. And I believe there might have been something else marked on it. I'm not sure. But that was behind the stone. And it was flat ground. So you're like, okay, what's under that? Maybe nothing. There's a mound nearby. Apparently, that's where the grave is, not where the stone is, which I also thought was interesting. I don't know if that's a ritualistic burial.
It was in a very old grave.
They weren't that perplexed about it, but they were like, what is this? And so they go in there. They've been told by their client, there's someone that hired them to investigate this. They're supposed to take the coffin out, not open it, and burn it. Not look inside, not unseal it, burn it. So they go and they dig and they find the coffin at one point. And I guess they take that away.
They had to do a specific ritual to make sure this exhumation was safe. So they hired 5 guys, day laborers, and then they were marked with pig's blood. As these 5 guys dug up the coffin, they also killed these pigs or stabbed these pigs. So the evil that came out from that, because they're doing something quote-unquote wrong, would go into the pigs and not going to them. So they tried to take some precautions. So those 5 guys, they are there to get the coffin out. They're supposed to make sure there's nothing else buried in there. And they were hitting their shovels on the ground to make sure there weren't other coffins in there.
And there's one guy down there.
And there's one guy at the very, very end.
So Luis just set the stage. There's a guy, one of the day laborers, happens to be down in the pit. It's quite deep where the coffin was buried. Of course, they had taken the coffin away, but he's supposed to do whatever the final ritual is to make sure the ground is safe. So he's got a shovel.
They're supposed to make sure there are no other coffins in there.
So he's just verifying that there's nothing else there. There happens to be a snake, a red and black snake, which are the dangerous kind. Right?
Yeah.
We think it's a coral snake.
Or similar, yeah.
Red and black. We know it's dangerous because of the colors. So he sees the snake. And he takes his shovel and goes, bam, cuts it in half. What's funny is you see the snake crawling right before he cuts the snake in half, and you're looking at the snake and he doesn't look quite normal. The head part looked a little blurry or something. You're thinking, what's going on with the snake? And then he takes the shovel and bam, cuts it in half.
Yeah.
And what happens? The head of the snake turns around, faces the camera basically, and goes like a weird hiss. And you see that the face of the snake is humanoid. It looks like a human face with long black hair. And that's when Luis and I were like, oh, something's definitely, that's a horror film if there ever was one. You see a weird face on a snake, looks like a human head. Ooh. Okay, so you know there's more going on. And then, of course, they need to take that coffin. Okay, so you have more information on the snake? Go ahead and talk about it.
So the creature with the snake body and a woman head is called a wet woman, a Japanese yokai.
It's a yokai.
Which was a suggestion that there was a Japanese body in there or something related to it.
And perhaps Korean viewers would know that.
Of course,
because it's a very scary thing for them.
Basically, Chinese civilization, Korean civilization, Japanese civilization, they probably have the same starting point. They're all related to some degree.
Yeah, but this is specifically hinting that there's a Japanese spirit somewhere. You're assuming at that point, if you understand that this is a Japanese spirit, you're assuming at some point that the coffin that they have just unearthed contains a Japanese person or Japanese remains. Mm-hmm. They've already taken the coffin away. The team is gone. It's raining. Apparently, the cremation can't happen during the rain. There's some sort of issue there where you don't want to cremate during the rain.
You're not supposed to cremate anyone during the rain because it makes their journey to the afterlife much harder and they might not find a good spot in the afterlife.
Right. And then you're thinking, who's in that coffin? Because, ooh, this is really creepy. There's some sort of possible Japanese spirit, definitely some strange, nefarious thing going on. Why can't we open it? So you wonder about the family. There's one particular member of the family, the one who hired them. It's a guy who's got a newborn son. They're worried about the son being somehow affected by an evil spirit. So this is all coming together and you're thinking, what's going on with his grandfather? The aunt, who's the daughter of the dead grandfather, she has to decide, well, do we want to move the coffin somewhere? Do we want to cremate? So she also had not made that final decision yet. The grandson who had hired the team said, oh, we definitely got to cremate him and we can't open this. So there's a lot of mystery going on. We don't know what's happening here. They've got the coffin at the cremation area and it's a very elaborate coffin.
Juniper, a tree coffin, which was very rare and important and expensive.
It's a very elaborate coffin with a lot of intricate designs on it. And as Louise said, made out of juniper, a juniper tree, associated with royalty. The geomancer's partner makes the mistake of going to the bathroom or getting some food and leaves the coffin with the dude at the crematorium. The guy recognizes that this is royalty and it's like, okay, there's got to be something really cool buried in there. There's got to be some loot in that coffin. So what does he do? He breaks the seal. We're not supposed to break the seal. That's the whole point.
One thing we need to add about the wet woman spirit, the yokai, is that it's a water elemental. So when the guy basically kills that snake creature in half,
it's raining.
It starts raining.
So causes them to have to wait to not put it in the crematorium right away.
And she was put there to keep the balance of the 5 elements.
That's why it was sitting in the crematorium not getting cremated, and why the guy that works there opened it. So chaos effect. And of course, the shaman walks in just as he's opening it, and she can feel everything and sense everything. She senses some spirit going past her that knocks her over. We see the whoosh, and then we know chaos has now prevailed. This is the beginning of a pretty intense evil spirit situation.
The grandfather was a collaborator with the Japanese. The movie mentions a Japanese monk that was accompanying the grandfather and the Japanese army when they were in their incursion in Korea, is because this grandfather was a collaborator. And Gisune, which is the name that is given to this monk, is actually Kitsune, which is fox in Japanese. But the movie keeps saying oh, he was a fox. And I kept thinking the guy was a fox in human form. It just means that the monk uses a Japanese name for himself, like a yokai. Well, we eventually find out that when the Japanese army invaded Korea, in this particular story, they have Korean collaborators that are helping them manage the Koreans. They're now under their thumb. And the Japanese, when they came in, they brought an army, and of course they brought a monk with them. The monk is introduced as the fox.
Gitsune.
Yeah, eventually they say in Korean his name is Gisune. But at the same time, they kept saying, oh, it's the fox, Gisune.
There are foxes that show up along the road right in front of the gravesite. Every single time we go, we see these CG foxes that don't look, that
terrible,
great.
yeah.
They don't look great, but they are important.
The Korean viewers, and probably other Asian viewers as well, would immediately watch this and see them going to the top of a mountain to this plot that was not optimum. And they see the foxes around, almost warning them about it. And they know it's a really bad omen. And eventually the movie goes and spells it out and says, oh yeah, foxes at a burial plot, really bad omen, don't mess with it. And at some point, the foxes take off running. And then you know some shit is about to go down.
Have they abandoned ship? Is that
Yeah.
what? Okay. This is just a side comment for us. Kitsune was the name of a...
A client of ours.
Yeah. It's a game company.
Mm-hmm.
The game was called Midboss. And the fox is the logo for the company. So the grandfather is clearly evil. He was a collaborator with the Japanese. He's hungry. His spirit is hungry. I don't know what was going on inside the casket. So they never show what objects or whatever was in there, right? We never see anything in there.
No.
We never open it, so to speak. It just gets unsealed with a crowbar that the person at the crematorium uses. Some things are left unseen, which is interesting. Again, we talked about this. We have to imagine, well, what else is in there, right? But he says he's starving. He says he's hungry. And so he starts killing off his descendants. He first flies over to LA. Whoo! I'm leaving Korea. I'm in the wind.
Yeah, he kills his son first. He had the old guy by the window. He kills him first.
Right, the guy that was paralyzed. And then when he sees his father, the spirit of his father, he was able to talk all of a sudden. He was being fed by his much younger wife. And in the reflection of glass, you see the spirit eating a body. You don't ever see anything up close. That's what Luis was mentioning. There's not a lot of gore in that sense. There's a lot of clouded, blurry, and maybe within a reflection, farther away gore. And so it's suggested. What's going on is more a suggestion than anything else. But you hear the sounds, the munching sounds. You know that the body is being eaten. That starts with the son.
So the main story is that there's this very rich Korean family who's immigrated to the US, and they're in real estate, which is obviously very meaningful if the grandfather was a collaborator that worked with the Japanese on taking Korean soil and making the soil possibly Japanese. It's funny that that's how the family became rich, and now the descendants are in America making money with real estate.
Some of the descendants.
A chunk of the family that has immigrated to America and works in real estate, including the grandson, who's the head of the family. He had a brother that killed himself. He has a father who had a stroke and is now barely able to feed himself or not. He needs a younger wife to do it for him. He has an aunt who's still in Korea, and this guy has a newborn baby, and this baby has been crying non-stop since he was born. And when we introduce to the baby is sedated. They literally had to sedate the baby because otherwise it would be a non-stop kind of thing. The family at this point is at their wits' end. They don't know what else to do. They bring the shaman and her assistant from Korea to find out what's going on. And the reason they're doing that is because the head of the family, like I said, already lost a brother to madness. So he's saying there's something going on with the family. Of course, they all know their grandfather was a collaborator and basically cursed the whole family by being a collaborator. The reason the family is rich is because he was a collaborator.
I guess they didn't want to tell the team, though.
It's a sense of supreme shame to work with the Japanese. They find out on that picture of the grandfather with the Japanese army.
Through some either research on the picture that they find or something, they figure out that the grandfather was a collaborator. They're not necessarily told. We don't fully remember. It could be the aunt. She finally says, okay, I'm going to tell you since all this horrible stuff has been happening. Everybody's getting killed. Now I'm going to tell you. Interestingly, only the LA family gets killed.
They
Korea.
stop the spirit right before it's going for the baby. They burn the coffin,
Right.
and that ends that story right there.
So let's go back. We were saying, and I was trying to say, that first the grandfather's son, the one who's paralyzed, possibly from a stroke, gets killed. Then the grandson, I believe, gets killed. Or the younger wife. She gets killed off screen. She's dancing around.
Right, yeah.
And then all of a sudden, and then we don't see it. The person who hired the team, who's basically the grandson of this spirit, he gets killed. Those three characters that are in LA get killed. The baby is next. The spirit comes to the baby and looks like he's about to kill the baby. But at that very moment, they finally cremate.
Yeah, and what's really interesting is that the grandfather spirit is going to America to kill the baby.
Okay.
You know, so maybe they don't know that the older guy and his wife got killed already.
The person who hired the team originally is in LA. He goes to Korea to supervise the exhumation. That's why he's in Korea. He lives in LA. His father's paralyzed and he has a young wife. They're all in LA. Those three characters plus the baby. They're all in LA. The head of the family, as Luis says, goes to Korea. Another thing I want to point out is the vampire trope. Open the window. Let me in. We heard that several times in this movie where someone is sitting at a window or glass and they're being tasked by the spirit or asked, controlled or forced to open the window to let the spirit in. Now that happens with the person who's paralyzed, possibly from a stroke. Not only does he speak, but he actually moves. I believe he opens the window and lets his father, the spirit of his father, in. It happens again with the son, what Luis is saying, the head of household, the guy that hires everybody. He is in Korea temporarily because he's overseeing the exhumation. He has a similar situation with the window. The phone rings and it's supposedly the geomancer on the phone saying, oh, I got to talk to you. I got to tell you what's going on. I've got to warn you. And he says, I'm going to be there real soon to talk to you in person. Well, what happens? As the phone conversation is happening, there's a knock at the door. And he's like outside the door already. Oh, I'm here. And then, of course, you're hearing the phone conversation where he's saying, well, I'm almost there. The audience is led to believe that the rapping at the door, which is always a scary sound, right, has got to be the spirit.
Yeah. We're convinced
Because
that the spirit is right there.
Right. He's on the phone. That happened first. He's talking to who he believes and who the audience believes is the geomancer. Then there's a knock at the door with the voice of the geomancer outside the door. And we again think, well, wait a minute. That must be the spirit outside the door. So we're definitely confused. We're being led to believe that's the case. But then as the conversation continues on the phone, all of a sudden the voice on the phone says, open the window. Well, we know because we had seen this guy's paralyzed father get killed by opening the window. We immediately then know, oh my gosh, the voice on the phone is the spirit, not the voice at the door when the knock happens. We're like, oh no. And he goes back and forth. He looks at the window. He looks at the door. He looks at the window, looks at the door. And you're like, oh, please just open the door. No. He opens the window and then he dies. Of course, he's killed by his own grandfather's spirit. So that was a really interesting scene. And it's a good example of horror that really works.
And the whole idea of vampires asking you to open the door or the window to them, it's rooted, I think, in spiritualism and the idea that you can only be possessed or controlled by a spirit if you allow it to do it. So if you're weak of spirit, and of course the eyes are the window of the soul, so if you're weak of spirit, you metaphorically open yourself to an invading force. And that's, I think, where the whole vampire thing comes from, the trope. And it's a similar trope here where you have an evil/angry spirit that needs your permission to come in.
So my question is, they buried the grandfather in this far-off place. We find out later there's more to it than that, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But they bury him in this far-off place. They have this special royalty type of casket. We don't know what's inside, but we know it's sealed. And it's an unmarked grave, basically. Were they trying to make sure the spirit doesn't get out? Why did they think it's evil? And why didn't they destroy it in the first place?
They're immediately asking that question that Jeannie just asked. Why was such an important person, the grandfather, some sort of a government official, buried in such a nondescript way on top of a mountain in a less than ideal plot? It's because the story the movie told is that the Japanese, when they invaded, they used supernatural means to kind of take over Korean land. And this grandfather who was working with them gets buried in a very specific place where he won't be found. Why? Because they don't want him to be found. They don't want what they call the iron spike, a metal imbued with supernatural qualities, which later they would describe as an anima, to be found. Because that is seen, according to the movie, as the way the Japanese Empire found to cleave Korea in two. So that's why the grandfather's burial plot or body had never been excavated before, because the family knew something was off with the whole situation. It brings great dishonor to them, so they weren't going to mess with it. But eventually, that spirit was so pissed off and so angry and so hungry that it was affecting all the descendants. It led to the suicide of the brother. It led to close to madness for the head of the family, which complained about headaches and having trouble.
And now the newborn.
So
Luis mentioned anima. That word comes up later in the film. We watched like half the film, and this spirit from the grandfather is kind of vanquished because they go in and they finally cremate, and just as he's about to do something to affect, possibly kill the newborn baby, all of a sudden he disappears and everything's, oh, okay, pause. Oh my gosh, we're only halfway through the film. Okay, there's a whole lot more going on here that we're going to see. Everybody goes back to their normal lives, and then we discover something new. The geomancer has already met up with this person who's a monk who does geomancy. He saw a geomancy insignia on his compound as he was driving by. This was on the way, I think, to the general burial ground. So he had already talked to this guy before. He comes back to him because he has this weird feeling. He has this itch. He's thinking there's something off with that grave still. And of course, we hadn't seen that snake again. So we know something's funny. Oh, and he also talks to the worker. I think it was him that talked to him, or his assistant, talks to that laborer who had seen the snake and killed it. He said, I shouldn't have killed the snake. His eyes are all messed up, and he's realizing, man, I shouldn't have done that. He's been freaking out the whole time. So the geomancer ends up going back to the site. He gets some tools, I think, from the monk. Monk said there were a bunch of people trying to rob graves, and they left tools here. So he goes and he takes them, and he goes down into the grave, which is huge. It's this huge pit still. It hasn't been refilled or anything. And he takes a shovel, and he's popping around. Of course, he sees the snake cut in half with the wet woman face. And then he also senses something else buried underground, but it's a smaller space. He's like, what is that? Well, guess what? It turns out to be a vertical coffin. In other words, a coffin that's buried vertically instead of horizontally. That's why it's a smaller area, surface area. And so they exhume that. So now we've got another exhumation. They bring up this ratty, not like the royal coffin. It feels like particle board or some very cheap wood, old wood, but it's not a nice coffin. And it has what looks like barbed wire wrapped around it. They put it in the monk's compound area. Oh, another thing is that it's very, very tall. It's from a giant person. If there's a person in there or remains in there that extend the entire coffin, we're talking about possibly over 7 feet, 8 feet tall. It's huge. They store it temporarily in the monk's compound, and then the rest of the team shows up. They're like, what's going on? Well, there's a lot of shenanigans that start to happen now that they've unearthed this vertically buried coffin. So there's a phrase that pops up: the fox severed the tiger's waist. We already talked about the fox kitsune. So the fox severed the tiger's waist is a key metaphor. It symbolizes Japan's historical attempt to spiritually cripple Korea, known as the tiger, by burying iron stakes, the fox's work, along the peninsula's quote-unquote waist, the 38th parallel/border, to prevent its prosperity, representing colonial-era geomantic warfare and the division of Korea. So now we know what that phrase means.
Right at the middle point of the movie, which you mentioned earlier, when we thought stuff was getting kind of sorted and the story was ending, as they cremate the body of the angry grandfather, they go back to the original burial plot. There's this very dramatic thing that happens where they realize that the process of verifying that there wasn't another coffin in there was cut short. And they find out there's a gigantic, which Jeannie mentioned, coffin in there, buried vertically. And then someone says, oh no, second internment. And that's a huge deal because they needed all those special rituals to handle the exhumation of the grandfather's coffin. It's a very delicate process in Korean folklore to really take someone out of the ground and bury them again somewhere else. So realizing that there was a second coffin in there, a big one, buried vertically, which is not a good sign, and that no ritual was performed when he took that out, in the movie, they don't even understand why he wants the coffin out of there. They're literally saying, why do you want to mess with us? Why are you doing this? And I don't think the movie ever explains to us why he feels so compelled to do it. Later on, he admits it was a mistake, because killing the snake creature, the yokai was a guardian, sealing the coffin in there and whatever was inside it. So killing the yokai cursed the poor guy who did it, who's now sick, and messed up the protection around that coffin. Why? Because the Japanese who did it didn't want that coffin disturbed. Why? Because he has the iron spike inside it that's cleaving Korea in half. They didn't want anyone to go in there. So when the snake creature, the yokai, gets cut in half and killed, things are already going bad here. There's already a huge problem. But for some reason, the geomancer, he knows something's terribly wrong with it. He knows that he needs to get that out of the earth. Maybe from patriotic pride, I don't know.
So one thing about the geomancer character, which is interesting, is that the original exhumation with the grandfather, he doesn't want to do it. He's the one who seems like the Cassandra character. Don't mess with this. No, no, no. I'm warning you. This is going to be a problem. It's going to cause chaos. Let's not mess with this. This is a bad sign. Let's just cut our losses and don't take the money. There's something off about this. Let's leave it alone. But he gets convinced and almost forced to continue to work with them. Then later on, he can't stop himself. He's like, I need to know what's going on here. I need to get this other coffin out of here. But my concern is that if they went, oh no, double internment, but then they don't perform a ritual.
I think it's because they didn't know what that really was. And at this point, the geomancer is being more moved by instinct and pride than anything else. Mm-hmm. He's feeling compelled to take that out of the ground. He knows it's something quote-unquote evil. So the team doesn't want to mess with the second coffin.
Yeah, it's the opposite situation. And actually, the shaman in particular does not want to mess with it. She's very concerned that this is going to cause a lot of trouble. So anyway, they do bring the coffin, a very, very large coffin, to the monk's compound.
They actually did a protection spell around the coffin with white horse's blood. And
the rice.
And rice. And it was a magic circle you see in Western magic around the coffin. And then during the night, they hear a loud noise and some screaming. Whatever was inside the coffin comes out, which is a giant ball of fire, through the roof and escapes.
This one even more powerful than the other one. They were able to do some sort of protection spell. Why didn't that work? It just was too weak?
They were thinking in 2 dimensions. They were thinking that this was a body that could try to literally walk out of the coffin, that they would have stopped the body, but they're dealing with Japanese ghosts.
This Japanese ghost is a samurai spirit that needs his helmet, by the way. I don't know if that's a functional thing, because he's like, where's my helmet? I need my helmet. The helmet is there. It was just separated from him while he was buried. But he's also extremely tall, which makes you think this was not a person. This is a spirit.
Well, they say that what's animating that gigantic body is an anima. It's an object that's imbued with spirit and matter, personality, or something like that. Of course, anima means soul in Latin.
I don't know if it's a real remains of anything, like if it actually has bones and was ever a human being. Could it be like a golem that we saw in Oddity?
Kind of.
Like the wooden character from certain folklore?
It was
definitely not wooden.
You see in the flashbacks that there was a samurai that had his head cut off, and then they put the head on it. But before they put the head back on top of the body, they use either a sword or the iron spike through the body, to the neck, actually, almost like a spine, you know? And then they put the helmet on, and you can even see like a human spine on the helmet itself. They animated this dead body, the spike itself, with this spiritual force, and that becomes an anima.
So you think this monk was involved in animating this body? But then the body itself is so tall, it's much taller than any human probably in recent history, let alone ancient history.
Yeah, I don't know.
So it seems to me that it's not a real human that they've animated.
I got the same feeling too. It was the Kitsune/Fox monk that did it.
Yeah.
That the Japanese brought from Japan with them on their invasion of Korea and China. So that's what created this whole thing. And why? Because they wanted to have this iron spike, and they wanted to bury this anima that contains an iron spike inside it, but it looks like a human body that's even hungry, remember? You say, I'm hungry, give me some fish. And he's eating the fish.
It does eat the
so
fish.
It definitely is a creature that needs to be fed. So what happens is that they bring it to the monk's complex, and then the creature escapes as a ball of fire, which is a Japanese form for a type of yokai or spirit, through the roof. It takes on its samurai form again, outside of the circle, severely injures the assistant shaman. And then he gets taken to the hospital and he's kind of semi-possessed by that creature, to the point where he's talking as the creature. But the samurai side of things goes back to the burial plot. It's underground again, just waiting. He can roam as he pleases now. He's just waiting.
So the monk's compound is close enough to the original burial plot that he kind of makes his way back in there on foot.
He does. Or flying through the air.
Because he's a ball of fire.
Yeah.
They mentioned that he needed something for strength. I know there's the iron rod, but I think also the helmet is important.
Well, it was important to him as a samurai because it was about dishonor or whatever.
Right.
That's why the police was saying that there were a lot of animal attacks in the region, and he even sent the army. It was because of this anima who was roaming the countryside.
Right. And they blame it on a poor little cute bear, which is kind of funny.
Black
This
bear.
is toward the end. They show a little cute cub romping around, a fuzzy cute bear. They're like, look, we found the perpetrator of all these horrible animal attacks.
So the samurai now or the anima is back in his hole and is underground, and the helper shaman is in the hospital. He barely made it, but is still being possessed by that creature. The anima itself, the physical manifestation of it, and the ball of fire are roaming the countryside, and they need to solve this. They say we need to distract the anima long enough to find the iron spike and then burn it. They still think the iron spike is separate from the samurai creature. So the shaman herself says, I'll distract it long enough for you to find the spike, and then we'll purify the spike. And that's gonna kill the anima. She does this special thing with fire and incantations behind this gigantic tree, which is really old tree.
Right, she tries to lure the entity out of the burial spot.
Yeah.
They do the fish, and then they kind of lead to the tree, and then she pretends that she's a tree spirit.
And talking as if she's been there for thousands of years, and she's pissed that creature is there instead. And the creature engages her, and they're having this conversation. And you don't know where the physical manifestation of this thing actually is. You just hear the voice, and you see her all the time. The geomancer is in the grave digging for the iron spike that he knows they need to purify with a white horse's blood and take it out of the ground to solve this issue that's been hampering Korea for hundreds of years. In the process, A, the samurai creature figures out the woman's not a tree spirit, it's just a human. And B, the geomancer finds out that there's nothing there. Eventually, they connect the dots. They throw the horse's blood on the samurai creature itself, which hurts it tremendously. At the very end, as the geomancer is injured, which we think is definitely injured, a fatal wound of some sort, there's the wooden cable from the pickaxe that he was using to dig, and he realizes that the samurai it was something about the elements, like the pickaxe is wood and earth, and the samurai is water and steel, and the spike is inside it. So wood and water is stronger than water and metal.
And was the water signified by the snake?
Maybe because the rain, I don't know. So he goes and he strikes the samurai creature with this wooden handle itself, which is also the entire wooden body of the pickaxe. Symbolically, it's kind of cool because, of course, in Japan, samurai train with wooden katanas. So it's kind of cool that he grabs a big piece of wood, which would think can do nothing, to some 9-foot-high creature with metal suit of armor. But he's doing a lot of damage. And he cleaves it in half, a diagonal cut. And then they see the metal. And that ends that anima right there. Because once that spike has been cleansed, there's nothing attached to it anymore. And that anima goes away and the movie ends.
We didn't talk about what was going on with the possessed assistant. She brings 2 women in there. A mother and daughter team, I think. And they chant, and she has interesting conversations with the entity through the possessed assistant. And they really think he's going to die at some point. We know that the entity, the anima, tried to take out an organ. The good news is he survives. He has tattoos all over his body. There's like a Buddhist scroll or something all over his body. And somehow the entity figured out that there was this one spot in the side where they didn't have a tattoo, and that's where he reached his hand in. That darn spirit stuck his hand in the one spot where he doesn't have a tattoo. Ha ha, smarty pants. But the other things that were funny. We've already mentioned a few things, but there was a point at which when they did go back to the site, they all had tattoos on their faces. We don't know that at the beginning. They're just driving along. They know what they're dealing with now. So they get stopped at the side of the road and they have to prove that what they're doing makes sense. And all of their faces are covered with these tattoos, temporary tattoos, obviously.
Is the specific
Incantation
that was on the body of the assistant the places where the samurai creature did not go through? They realized the samurai creature respected that and couldn't go through it.
Okay.
So as a form of self-defense, they all had the specific line all over the bodies and faces and everywhere else.
We don't know if it's all over their bodies, but it's definitely on their faces. So the joke is that the guy stops them and they all look guilty as they're being stopped. They all kind of look at the guy and they have these things all over their faces. And they look sheepish. So that was fun. Toward the end of the movie, the geomancer's ready to die. He gets injured as well. We think the geomancer's going to die. He's clearly injured. He feels weak. He's like, I've lived my life. I'm fine. I'm just going to go ahead. And then he goes, oh, wait, my daughter's wedding. And we're like, okay, he's obviously not going to die.
Yeah.
So it has a lot of lightheartedness amidst all this super intense folk horror and historical significance that can be very traumatic for Korea to even look at. Interesting tone, let's just say.
Along the lines of how this is important for Korean culture, I found out through a search on IMDb, I think, that all the main characters' names are references to famous Korean heroes when they sought independence, the beginning of the dynasties, Joseon dynasty and stuff like that. All the license plates for their cars also alluded to specific dates that are important for Korean independence because Korea, if I'm not mistaken, started as part of China a long, long time ago. And they became their own kingdom eventually, just like Thailand today is a kingdom. They were Siam a long time ago. This angle is very much an important bit of information if you want to understand this movie. So yeah, the geomancer is about ready to die and he's making the speech about he's going to go back to the earth. He's fine dying. He accepted it. Like Jeannie said at the very last minute, he's like, oh, my daughter's wedding. So they cut to the wedding and he's alive and well and the whole family's in and the movie ends on a big happy note.
The entire group that he works with is being welcomed in to the family photo.
So it becomes a big happy family at the end. And one thing I wanted to mention about the assistant geomancer is that he's Christian. He's Catholic. Korea is a mix of Buddhists and Catholics. And it's really cool how throughout the movie, his assistant is helping them with the graves and the geomancy itself and all of the stuff that you would think is more about Korean folklore. But he's a Christian, and that's fine. He has his own faith, and in the end, he's seen praying with people of his own religion, and no problem. And that's a really cool touch of this movie, I think.
Okay, let's do our final thoughts. We kind of said it already. I think we both give it a thumbs up. It's a good movie. It's definitely worth watching for many reasons. It's not really scary, although there are some interesting moments that give you pause and kind of freak you out. There's some gore. It's not heavy. There aren't really any jump scares except for the snake incident, which I found was like, whoa, you know. There's some suspense. The part where he's trying to decide, am I going to open the door or am I going to open the window? That was neat. So there are really cool elements in here. Definitely worth seeing. There's the folklore aspect, the historical aspect. Very well directed. Enjoyable film because it does have the comedic aspects as well.
I loved it. I would say it's a hearty thumbs up for me, even if I understand and can recognize it's not a quote-unquote great movie. I think it's a very, very, very good horror movie. It's probably one of my favorite Asian horror movies, if we're going to put that in that category. It's fun to watch. It's lighthearted. It's well produced, well directed. I have to mention something that I haven't said before. The visual effects on the ball of fire that the anime uses to move around are some of the best I have ever seen. It's very hard to animate fire and to make it look realistic. And to have fire that's flying around and casting shadows and casting light reflections on trees, of all things.
Oh yeah, that was neat.
That is so hard. I don't know how they did it, but it's like 9 out of 10 effects work. And if you think about this movie, the whole movie could have cheap effects, but no, everything is top notch. It's done incredibly well. And it's a haunting, atmospheric, moody piece that will really kind of take you in, and you're going to live that reality with them. Every little turn, every little intercut from one scene to the other, you're going to take a beat and kind of freak out a little bit because you know this is taking you in a place you don't expect.
Yeah, you're not really sure what's going to happen. And the idea of being afraid of the possibilities, I think, is really important to mention. The character development is great. I feel like I know the characters. We didn't get into that, but they all have different personalities. They all have different needs. They all have different suspicions about what's going on, different forms of knowledge, talents. It was great to see them working together. So it's basically a team of 4. I want to see them again. I almost wish there was a sequel or even a series that's a procedural series based on this, because it was very enjoyable.
Yeah, very much so. God, I had a really good time with it. It's not overly gruesome. It's not like super scary. Of course, I would have liked to see a little more gore and have a little more fear generated by it, but I loved it still. And that's why originally I kept thinking about Ghostbusters, and it was hilarious when Jeannie mentioned it first, because that was literally in my head, just because it was such a fun time as far as horror movies go.
But there's a lot of serious elements here. We don't want to make it sound like it's super light. It has a lot of levity, but at the same time, the intense cultural, historical aspects, the significance of the anima, the significance of the grandfather spirit, the fact that he was a collaborator, that's all serious stuff. So I don't want to say it's just a goofy movie, because it's not. And it doesn't feel that way at all. The way that the comedy is used is almost more of comic relief than anything else.
Yeah, I don't know if there's anything else to say other than it's a very, very good movie. It's a little longish. It's like 2 hours and 12 minutes long or something.
Oh, and we should also say that toward the end, I had mentioned this earlier, that things do get a little slower paced at the last third or fourth of the film. Everything that happens after the anima shows up and we move him into the compound, there's some dead space in that area.
And Jeannie mentioned this earlier, there's very clear phases here. There's phase 1 and phase 2 basically, and it's even divided in parts. They have their own headers.
There are chapters in this film. I think it's 5 or 6 chapters.
6.
Each chapter ends always on not a cliffhanger, but a woo, what's that type of thing, where it makes you think.
She mentioned how the pacing is a little off toward the final third, maybe. I agree. I think that having the grandfather plot be resolved with cremation and burning the coffin and everything else, having such a clear-cut dividing line between that and the rest of the movie felt a little off. It's like jumping from one carriage to another, it's a little iffy. So it was great when they found out about the second internment and the dramatic point. That was awesome. But the movie is obviously going into a separate bit of storytelling in a way.
And I think normally when you have that, almost like a false ending in a film, you usually have about 20 to 30 minutes left, not a whole hour. So I think that it does make sense structurally that you wouldn't have that happen right in the middle of the film. You would make everybody think that it's almost over, and then we've got like 20 minutes left, and that's where the real ending is. I always think of Poltergeist. That's a good false ending example.
That's a perfect point, because a mistake that movies make all the time is having multiple endings, and then it gets really irritating. It's not the case here, but like Jeannie said, the fact that this first quote-unquote ending is smack in the middle, and then you have a full hour ahead of you with basically almost like a separate story, other than the fact that the grandfather was a collaborator. Everything beyond that is really brand new. The thing about the spike and the samurai spirit and the anima, all of that stuff is a new element. So I think that's the one serious problem with this film. That's probably what keeps it from being a great film, is the fact that it doesn't roll over like an adventure that has no breaks. It has a big break smack in the middle, and then you have to kind of gather momentum again to have a second ending that somehow is less satisfying than the first ending.
Right. Okay. Well, unless there's anything else to say, I think we're done with
That's
this.
it.
I guess it's time to bid you adieu. Bye.
For now.
Toodaloo.